Most of you know that Marc Emery is in fact sitting in an American jail right now for doing what was on open display in this city about a week ago at the Treating Yourself marijuana festival, where the world's best purveyors of seeds and various kinds of marijuana paraphernalia were on open display at the local convention center. Marijuana is the most widely used illegal drug in the world, and its rates of use are increasing. A 2006 UN World Drug Report suggests that there is an estimated 164 million people worldwide that use cannabis. And the market is estimated variously at up to $100 billion a year. At the same time, American statistics suggest that marijuana laws have imprisoned 20 million Americans since 1965. That's an astonishing number. That's the entire province of Ontario and the entire province of Quebec. And if the usual 10-to-1 rule applies, then something in the order of 2 million Canadians have variously had their lives ruined by marijuana legislation. Even if it's half that, it's a preposterous number. So to carry on this discussion, I've invited Jodie Emery, who is Marc Emery's wife and who is carrying his flag while he sits out his time in an American jail. This is Jodie Emery.
I have to admit, just seeing him up on the screen, I miss him. I miss him a lot. Marc has led a life of civil disobedience. He started here in Ontario when Sunday shopping was illegal. He opened his bookstore, City Lights, in London, and gave away books for free, daring the police to come arrest him. And he did the same right before Christmas, and he continued to try opening his store on Sundays, and he did go to jail for opening his store on a Sunday. Part of his efforts and the efforts of others led to Sunday shopping laws being struck down so that you guys can go get your coffee and groceries on Sunday here in this province. And he also moved on to other civil disobedience. He found out that Two Live Crew, a rap group, was illegal in Canada. You could not buy their Nasty As They Want to Be record because it was too nasty for the Canadian government. And he brought that album into Canada, took an ad in the paper and said, "Come on down and arrest me, let's go to court so I can demonstrate that this is an absurd law and needs to be changed." And he did that, and he did get arrested, and he did go to court. And he did the same with marijuana literature. There was a time when just having a pamphlet about marijuana would get you more punishment than possession of marijuana. You could not provide information about marijuana without being punished. He decided to bring up the book, Jack Herer's book, The Emperor Wears No Clothes, and sell that, and High Times magazine, and he sold that, and continued to try and fight these laws by breaking them and demonstrating that it was absurd that these laws even existed. He was very successful in these ways. Like Moses said, Marc Emery's Treating Yourself Expo just happened, and you had seeds being sold, and you had books and magazines available, you've got bongs and pipes. And all of that is due to Marc Emery's bravery. Marc moved to Vancouver in 1994 and decided, our movement needs money. The prohibitionists have taxpayers' dollars, unlimited amounts, and they use it. They use it on guns, they use it on cops, they use it on prisons. And he said, our movement needs money. And he decided to start selling marijuana seeds. Nobody else was selling seeds to Americans. That's a crazy idea. But Marc has a lot of crazy ideas that are really for the good of everyone, and part of that was to sell these seeds and promise everyone who bought those seeds that all the money would go back into legalization efforts. So over about 10 years, he started in 1994 and was arrested in 2005. But in that time period, he sold millions and millions of seeds to every country around the world, to every state in the United States. And these seeds not only helped people who are sick and dying find the relief that they needed from medical marijuana, But the money that was spent on those seeds went towards ballot initiatives to make medical marijuana legal in states like Colorado and Washington, D.C. That money went towards challenging the Canadian government in a Supreme Court challenge that went all the way up with David Malma-Levine, and unfortunately, cannabis users were deemed to have no more rights than cannibals. Marc financed political parties, the BC Marijuana Party, the Marijuana Party of Canada, the U.S. Marijuana Party, Greenleaf Party of Israel, marijuana parties all over, and not just a party to get high, but political parties to run in elections and to bring this issue to the forefront. He used that money for publishing Cannabis Culture magazine. He started Pot TV, which was video streaming on the internet before that even began. I think it was CBC and Pot TV had launching parties together saying, wow, we've got video on the internet, isn't that amazing? So Marc spent money getting information out there, financing medical marijuana cases for many people who were sick or dying and suffering, and they had been facing prison or some sort of punishment, and Marc used money to that end. Marc spent money on so many different activist efforts and campaigns that literally he cannot even remember them all. We get people writing to him saying, you gave me $5,000 for a conference, or you gave me $1,000 to hire a lawyer. And he says, well, that's wonderful, because over that time period, he gave away millions of dollars. Millions. All of it. Marc was not in the business of selling seeds to make money for himself. The day he was arrested, he had $11 in his bank account. The DEA admitted he had nothing. They didn't even fine him, because they know how to look for money if you've got it hidden away, and he doesn't, and he didn't, and they knew that. But the DEA, in questioning Marc's co-accused, were just scratching their heads. They couldn't believe, out of all the people they'd ever arrested and ever dealt with who were drug dealers, they always stashed money. But not Marc, because that wasn't the point to keep it for himself. The point was to finance a fight against one of the greatest human rights crises going on in the world. Every single day, every single minute, all day today, people's lives are being destroyed. Every single day, people who have never hurt anyone else, are facing prison, are facing the loss of their job, the loss of their children, the loss of their home, the loss of their freedom, the loss of their health, because of these laws. Marijuana does not hurt people anywhere near as much as the war on drugs and the war on marijuana hurts people. Marc was arrested in 2005 in Canada. Marc gave away all that money. He ran for office, very well known across Canada, sent his seed catalogs to every member of parliament, and paid income taxes. Over $500,000 he paid, and they kept saying, how's the seed business going? You got more money? He was so upfront, you could call him up on his cell phone if you wanted to know where your seeds were. And he didn't leave Canada, as he said. But we didn't think that the U.S. would come into Canada and take him away. He never left Canada, and he was facing life, which for him at his age meant death in prison when they arrested him. When the DEA arrested him, they bragged in their press release, and you can see this, the official document on the front page of freemarc with a C.ca. The DEA press release said, today's arrest of Marc Scott Emery is a significant blow to the marijuana legalization movement. Marc Emery has been deemed one of the most wanted international drug kingpins and the only one from Canada. This is a man who never sold drugs. He only sold seeds to finance the revolution, but the DEA admitted in their own press release that it was all about the money, it was all about the activism. They didn't even use the word seeds in their press release. That was pointed to by many as evidence that he's a political prisoner, and many people do believe that he is. He was extradited in 2010. He had two co-accused. Many of you here who are regulars know of Michelle Rainey, who passed away from cancer, who worked very strongly. She fought for years, and she suffered greatly. Many people suffer from disease and sickness and even just sadness, and they find relief from using marijuana. They never hurt anyone else, but they all face persecution, punishment, arrest, the loss of their life, the loss of their liberty. Every single day in the United States, SWAT teams are raiding houses, killing dogs, terrorizing children, destroying lives. at a cost of millions of dollars every year. In fact, the U.S. has spent over $1 trillion on the war on drugs. Marijuana is more readily available and more used than ever before. And that money should be going to education, to healthcare, to anything and everything except putting harmless people in prison. In the United States right now, 1 out of 100 Americans are behind bars. Half of those in prison are for drug offenses. Those prisoners would not be in prison and they would not be criminals if it was not criminal to possess, to grow, to deal in these drugs. Every single day around the world, people die from alcohol, tobacco, pharmaceutical pills, peanuts, water, cars. People die from all sorts of things. Hammers. Should we put people in prison for those things? Of course we shouldn't. So why does the war on drugs continue? Why is the war on marijuana continuing? Why is the Harper government implementing the law that they just passed through, the omnibus crime bill, for mandatory minimums, when mandatory minimum sentences in the United States have led to a mass civil rights violation of so many people being put away at a huge cost we cannot afford, especially not in this economy? Why does that war continue all the way down into Colombia, all the way over into Afghanistan? Why does the war on drugs go on when there are legal drugs at London Drugs and Shoppers Drug Mart? You have all these drugs available, and yet CEOs of Pfizer, they're not put in prison. They have blood on their hands. Marc Emery, my husband, he never hurt a soul. And most of those prisoners behind bars for marijuana have never hurt anyone either. And many of them themselves are sick and suffering and dying. This is a serious, serious crisis. People sometimes say to me, what are you doing trying to legalize marijuana? Why don't you do something more important like trying to end world hunger? Well, I'd like to tell them, like I'm telling you now, that lives are being destroyed. My husband was facing a mandatory minimum of 30 years to life in prison in the United States for selling seeds to finance a movement. He took a plea deal for 5 years. He admitted he was guilty. He was all over 60 Minutes, CNN, Wall Street Journal, Rolling Stone. Marc Emery is recognized worldwide as probably the biggest name in marijuana activism because he earned it. He did go to prison many times. He refused to shut down his store. He refused to stop giving the information about marijuana, and he refused to stop advocating for its use. He has seen, as I have seen, the harm caused. Can you imagine if someone you knew and loved was sick and suffering and dying, and they found relief only through marijuana, and suddenly the cops come to their door, and they couldn't get their doctor to sign their paper because the Health Canada program certainly is a shoddy program that doesn't meet everyone's need. But can you imagine if your loved one was facing prison for never hurting anyone else? That's what we really need to get across here. These laws against marijuana, prohibition in general, causes more harm than does the substance itself. And the Canadian Senate Special Committee on Illegal Drugs found that marijuana should be legal for everyone 16 and older, that marijuana prohibition causes more harm than does the substance itself. So why does it continue? Why do people keep going to prison? Why does Marc still have over 2 years left to serve in a U.S. federal prison in Mississippi? Because of cruelty. Part of it is because of money. The private prison industry in the United States lobbies against legalization because they know that that will mean fewer prisoners behind bars. I don't know if there's much more out there that's more immoral and unjust than making $1 on the stock market through Geo Group Prison Corporation, which is now in Canada, by the way, lobbying with this government right now, today. Those companies, they're on the stock market making money off of putting people behind bars, ruining their lives, taking children away from their fathers. When I visit Marc in Mississippi in this medium security federal prison, thankfully he was moved there instead of being in the private prison that he was kicked out of for blogging about how bad it was. Marc can't keep his mouth closed, like they've learned their lesson. You can't punish this guy. You got to just make it a little less horrible so he won't have as much to complain about. But Marc is in that prison, and I go down there and visit, and I see little tiny children running up to their daddy. Daddy, daddy, daddy. Go running up to him and jump into his arms because they don't get to see him. And those are the children lucky enough to see their father. Those are the children whose mother is willing to make the trip make the expense, bring her children to spend a couple hours with their daddy that they don't get to see. I got a phone call just recently from a guy named Dimitri. He spent the last 20-some-odd years of his life in the United States, has a family, lots of kids, everything he's ever known is in the United States. He was in prison with Marc. He took some pot over a border within the US. He is being shipped off to the Ukraine, where he was born, which he never knew. He has nothing, no family, nothing there. He's being put on a plane. He called me up and said, Jodie, I'm here at this horrible detention facility, which is where they place non-Americans. That's where Marc was, in these private prisons, in these immigration prisons, where there are human rights violations you would not believe. And he called me and said, this place is horrible, and I'm being put on a plane, and I'm being sent away. That man never hurt anyone else. That man could have contributed to society. That man could have held down a job, paid his taxes like he wanted to, but instead his life is ruined. His family's life is ruined. Society in general has been harmed by his persecution for marijuana. And like I said, there are so many harmful things out there, and if you think marijuana should be illegal because it's harmful, then every one of us has to live in a bubble and not even breathe the air because you might catch a cold, because everything out in the world may be dangerous, but you should only punish those who hurt others. For me, the reason this is such an important issue is that these laws are literally killing people, depriving them of their freedom, depriving them of being able to contribute, and this is at a cost of billions of dollars. Harper's own plans here in Canada, billions of dollars on prisons, on unreported crime, on marijuana crime, because Harper declared a culture war. He said he's going after the marijuana users, and he is. We don't even know the impact that that's going to have. A couple years from now, when Marc is back, and hopefully a guest again at Idea City, he'll tell you how much Canada has changed under this government, this corrupt government that I believe is illegitimate because there's a lot of election fraud. But this government likes to punish. They know that this is not about getting rid of marijuana. They know all the statistics, all the evidence, all the proof shows that keeping something illegal does not make it safer. It does not get rid of it. In fact, it enriches gangs, and that is really criminal. That organized crime and criminals around the world are making billions of dollars while you, the taxpayer, pays billions of dollars to keep them rich. Politicians and anyone who supports prohibition is supporting organized crime. That is a fact. Prohibition funds organized crime. They do not make their money in the legal market. If you want to deprive that organized crime of the billions of dollars they get, let's bring that industry into the legal economy. And we've seen in the United States a lot of progress. You know, the first question to start here was, are you optimistic or pessimistic? Well, in some cases, I'm very pessimistic. I've seen that it's getting worse. In some cases, I'm optimistic. You've got legalization and ballots on the initiatives on the ballot in the United States. Washington State, my husband's own prosecutor, John McKay, is backing a legalization initiative. There is progress, and it's not just potheads who want it legal, it's politicians too. It's healthcare professionals, law enforcement officials, and the general public at large. But you need to do something. The big idea here, we all agree marijuana should be legal, I'm pretty sure. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but we need to do something about it. That means actually taking action, getting on the street with a sign, writing a letter, talking to your friends, calling up your member of parliament or your MLA or whatever your political representative is and telling them, this is something that needs to end, and you're the one with the power, and you know what the people want, and we pay your bills, so you better do as we ask. And that's what I would ask of Harper. This drug war has caused far more damage than you can even begin to imagine. And unless we do something to stop it, it will continue to get worse. And people like my husband, who have never hurt anyone else, will be hurt in ways that you can't even imagine. And again, I miss Marc terribly. To not have him at home with me is heartbreaking, to say the least. My man deserves to be home, and so do all the other prisoners of the drug war. And every person like Michelle Rainey and others who suffer should be free to use marijuana in peace without the threat of arrest or persecution in any way whatsoever. So do something about it. Thank you.